Good morning and welcome to Get Enlightened with me, Lauren Scott. I'm so excited today to have my beautiful friend Rachel Ruth Tate here. She is with the Astrology Roadshow and our story is, well, I think it's incredible. What about you, Rachel?
It's incredible.
It
That's
re-
that's an apt description.
it really, really is. The way that we met and how parallel our lives are and astrology, the basics. Y'all are hearing it all today. So welcome to Get Enlightened, Rachel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, well, let's get started. Let's talk about how we met.
Yeah, please lead us off because the story is pretty incredible.
It is. Okay. Okay. So we met through, this is again, before the influencer quote unquote world was actually out there, right? So
Yes.
we met when it was really starting and we were both in, were you in humanitarian efforts or were you just over in LA? Because I can't remember exactly how you met BC.
Journey Travel with Purpose. We met through Lauren Beegler.
Yes. Who was working with BC. And I
BC Cerna, who had traveled with us.
and
Yes.
I was working with him starting on another project and we
Yeah.
were doing traveling purpose and I was asked to put together a fun event in the Dallas area
The
and
traveling good. Yeah, he wanted the traveling good and we were both local, but we hadn't connected prior to this.
yes.
And I had moved from Los Angeles to Dallas because Journey itself had dissolved as an organization.
Hmm.
Just it wasn't sustainable. It was a public benefit company and we weren't making enough money. Quite frankly, we were functioning as a nonprofit and not actually having the structure of a nonprofit properly. But let me just put it this way. The founder of Journey, Amy Merrill, let me shout her out. She went on to found Plan C. Hills.
Yes.
Amazing for her. But you and I are there locally to support BC and Lauren. So Lauren was staying at my house and the traveling good was this like literal roadshow, to use the
Yeah.
word that I'm now using for my own astrology podcast, a thingam. But basically, they were going around giving these events and these presentations. And essentially, you and I put this entire thing on.
I mean, the whole thing. We did the whole thing and I want to say like less than a week, to be honest
In a
with you.
week. And we kicked ass.
We
Let's be
did.
real. We did.
We did. We brought
Yeah.
in goat yoga. I brought in the
Yeah.
charity that was over it. And it was right when the goat yoga thing was really taking off. I want to say it was on Real Housewives at the time, and so
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
brought.
So I was working with Haley Capri, who had founded Deep LM Yoga, which is now defunct, but she had sort of
Yes,
pioneered this and you had connected with her and then I had connected with her and like we're putting on Go Yoga for the traveling good all of a sudden in a week.
yes, and it was such a success. It was like a sold out event. I was so impressed at
It
like
was insane. It was so crazy.
it was, and then from there. I went on a trip with BC to Dominican, the same trip that I had my dream because I was taking yoga and I was having to go to Fort Worth all the time. So I'd had this
Hmm.
dream. So this was a few months later.
Hmm.
He came to Dominican. I had this dream to start a yoga studio. We
Hmm.
were still connected because me and you, of course, hit it off like immediately.
We had just worked together. Like this was pretty soon after this happened that
Yeah, it
all of the
was
rest of it.
it was literally I want to say in like a 12-week period that everything
Yes. Yeah, that's
transpired.
accurate. Yes.
I woke up, I was like, I'm going to start a yoga studio. You were
I
actually
had done the same thing.
you had done the same thing with your meditation studio and you had just started, I want to say you were in for a few months. Like you
Well,
had,
we had this idea about the same time. I just did it. Like I spun it up. So from the time we filed for the LLC, which was in May of 2018, we opened our doors July 7th of 2018. So like you and I had talked right around the same time. I want to say it was May or June. And we had both had this idea by that time.
yeah, because
And
by
so we were
January
supporting each
is when I had opened up my studio and actually officially before I even started on the business side there, me and you talked
other.
about
Mhm.
franchising yours
Yes.
out to Granbury.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah, it opened and it was like successful from like day one. We were paying for ourselves from like month one. And you and
same.
I talked about that. Mm-hmm.
And it was just I mean just parallel lives and then I got really really sick with Crohn's
Mm-hmm.
and got out and you had well go ahead you take the floor there because that's when it was right before
I
2020.
Yeah, I ended up marrying a man very quickly, and he ended up making an attempt on my life.
Mm.
And so it was just like my marriage fell apart, and this was February of 2020.
Yeah.
And then the world closed in March of 2020. And so it felt like I was putting like a whole chapter of my life to rest really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Something that like
Same.
felt really important and like it would be forever. And then all of a sudden, everything I thought it would be totally flipped and switched. And it was like, okay, now I'm single and I have no business. Like I've literally closed the business because in March of 2020, like we officially closed in May of 2020.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if it would be a good idea for people to gather. You don't know. You
Exactly.
don't know. And I
I
just
I
wanted
walked
to,
away 2 weeks before COVID, and like
yeah.
looking back on that, I'm like, wow, like it,
You did. I remember that. I remember
yeah. Because remember, I got really, really sick, and then I had that ski
that.
accident, and I'm like, what
Yeah.
is the universe trying to tell me? And you were like, maybe it's time for you to like actually heal your body. And I did. I walked away, and 2 weeks later, the whole world shut down.
And I didn't say it to you at the time, but I was in a terrible place. Like I
Yes,
barely
you did.
remember the month of January in 2020. I barely remember it. If that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it was really emotionally tough for me because you can feel something unraveling before it does. And like you were physically sick and I was emotionally sick and we were about to walk away from both of our meditation and yoga spaces. Like it was sort of immediately at the same time.
It was absolutely wild, right? Like our lives have been so parallel
Mhm.
from
Without
ch-
even talking about it, like you and I really were not talking about this. Just like occasionally we would, and it would
oh
be
yeah,
insane.
no, it would be we would check in. You know, you've always been a beautiful friend to me in the sense that we don't have to be connected at the hip. You know, actually
Yeah.
everybody that's I'm really super close to, I'm not connected at the hip because we have our own lives and our own
Mhm.
times, and then we always come back together when there's like major life changes, and I just think that that's
It's trust. Like you're a
incredible.
badass and you're gonna like produce amazing creative things. And I love to connect with you and create with you
Oh,
anytime I'm
I feel
given
the
the
same about you,
opportunity.
girl. I feel the same about you. Okay, so
Yeah,
now
it's always amazingly connected.
it is beautiful. So now let's talk about how you deep delved into astrology.
Sure, absolutely. It was as well. Things kind of come as change upon you when you aren't seeking to choose them, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Astrology came to me as much as I ever came to astrology. I told you this sort of before we were recording the show, but I it was a New Year's Eve, and this was, I believe, 2019, so the New Year's Eve of 2019, and I had been doing astrology for years, and but I hadn't been doing it, if that makes sense. I had been studying it, I had been trying to learn it, I had been being diligent, but it's something that I felt like it
It's so
hadn't come.
much.
Yeah.
It's so much. Like,
Oh my gosh. I think of it really as it is a higher form of timekeeping. And you can think about like even the Prague astronomical clock. Astronomy and astrology were inextricable prior to the reign of Queen Elizabeth, quite
mhm,
frankly. And it was every major study of the heavens was primarily for navigation of
exactly.
the earth. And navigation of the earth, as above, so below. It's also navigation of the self and the inner bodies as much as the outer bodies. But when you think about it, the moon creates tidal movements. It changes circadian rhythms. And that is, we can see that with our eyes so easily. Same thing with the sun. The solar day pretty much creates the circadian rhythms.
Mhm.
And the solar year, it really creates the seasons. This is time that we experience and that affects us deeply. But every other body in the sky, it also has a gravitational relationship with us. It's not as primary as the sun or the moon, but it speaks to the way that we experience life on earth. And I think that is at its core, astrology is as physical as it ever was metaphysical. But it's
Absolutely.
incredibly hard to understand archetypically unless you kind of just get it. And like I told you earlier, I just got real sick that New Year's Eve of 2019. I was reading Timaeus by Plato and I woke up and I just like got it. I understood what was kind of what this whole system was about and how to understand the inputs and the outputs, all intuitive reading, in my opinion, is the same.
Yeah.
If you understand the system, nothing is random. Randomness doesn't exist. Everything is interwoven on the sort of loom of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so every system is going to give you sensical or legitimate outputs that have valid data for you to interpret and then understand your reality by. But whether it's tea leaves or tarot cards or astrology or crystals or whatever your mode is for reading reality, and for a lot of people it's like weather patterns, or it's whatever
Yeah.
it's engineering, it's whatever your art, your deep understanding of reality is. Music is another great example. You can use that system to understand the reality you're in. And astrology is just my primary one.
I love it. Now, since you have the road show, you do it every single day, right? The astrology every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What is it that people should really look for when they're getting an astrology birth chart reading? Because, the reason why I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking this is because I think there are so many talented people out there that do know and are downloaded and are really, really good at astrology, tarot, I channeling,
Right.
whatever it is that they do. But I also think that with TikTok becoming so mainstream that,
Mm-hmm.
you have a lot of people out there that are charging an arm and a leg to get a reading and a birth chart, but not doing it the right way. So let's tell the people out here, what is it that they should really be looking for when they're looking for an astrologer and when they're looking for a reading?
Lauren, I'm so glad that you brought this up and that you have thought to
Thanks.
ask this, because I know that Gen Z has been such a boon for astrology. They're so wonderful. They have totally popularized, like, as a millennial, I'll give it to Gen Z. They understand astrology better than any other generation I've ever met. And
It,
like, it makes sense to them. And so there are now a lot of creators that are in this space. And I want to take you back a little bit, back to Queen Elizabeth,
do it.
because
Take it to the
it was
basics.
it was at that point. So I practiced Hellenistic astrology, which is the most ancient form of Western astrology, which is really northern hemisphere astrology. The sun interacts totally differently with the northern hemisphere than it does the southern.
Hmm.
And Vedic astrology, which is Indian astrology, which is even more ancient than Hellenistic astrology, that tells you from the lens of that viewpoint and that interaction with all the different planets. It's a really different thing. But they both tell you a lot about how to navigate life and how to interpret and contextualize. Nothing's predictive, but when things happen in your outer experience, it's nice to have a framework internally upon which to hang those experiences that makes sense and gives you purpose. And so
Yes.
that's what astrology is. The best way to get a good reading, number one, honestly, it's a referral. If you know somebody that's had a reading that gave them a lot of clarity and purpose and you trust the judgment of that person, it's far better, in my opinion, to go with that sort of a referral than to find some random on social
Oh
media.
yeah, mine too. Mine too. That goes with any of
Any
the
healer.
healing modalities. Like I think
And
referrals are the biggest thing you can do.
but other than that, I would say that there are a lot of people that practice astrology in back to Queen Elizabeth. So she inherited that whole tradition, and Western astrology was started in sort of Mesopotamia. So since we've been looking at the sky and the movements and navigating the earth, we've been doing astrology, and people early on collaborated a lot. I think we forget that, like prior to Christianity. And I'm somebody who's a big Christ fan, so I'm saying this as a good Christian, but like, there
Yeah.
was a lot of destruction of a lot of the ancient wisdom, which
Yes.
was collaborative between a lot of the different areas. When, like, say, the libraries of Alexandria, all these major centers were looted and burned. But other than that, there was a lot of that tradition that was still completely alive and completely cogent. And Queen Elizabeth had herself a wonderful astrologer. His name was John Dee. He's a mathematician and astrologer of some great note. But she essentially had her own astrologer, and then she forbade astrology. She
Oh.
literally criminalized it for anybody else. And so
that's
astrology was
that's
shut
wild.
down in the Western world because nobody wanted anybody to predict the death of the monarch. and some other stuff, but it
Makes
was really
sense.
that tradition was buried, and that was the dominant power at the time. Elizabeth, essentially to Elizabeth, there was a dynasty there for the UK, and their cultural influence really impacted Western astrology. And in sort of the 20th century, a lot of American astrologers like the venerable Linda Goodman, and I mean, other than the Bible, Linda Goodman's books have sold more copies than any other book in the English language.
Yeah.
And she did sun sign astrology. And sun sign astrology is effective, but it's so small a slice.
That's
It's like,
that's how I learned, was from her books and
mhm.
focusing on sun sign astrology when I was a
And that's
child.
it makes sense. Like Sunset, she did amazing and does, her books are incredible and they're useful, but she is fractional in terms of her own acumen, to be
Uh,
frank.
oh, 100%. I mean, actually, as a kid, just dabbling in it, probably around 14, like
Hmm.
learning, the sun sign and what that even meant, and then reading the astrology, because at that time, we didn't have internet. It was the Sunday
Hmm.
newspaper that
Oh
came,
yeah. Oh yeah.
and so
Tons of
that
information.
that was
Yeah.
like my introduction. And then my mom, she was always really into healing modalities, and I started yoga and meditation young, and so
Me
she
too.
she always loved astrology. I know. I've been meaning to ask you, because did you grow up in Highland Park?
So my parents moved there when I was 18. My siblings were younger, and they stayed there for some time. My dad's been at SMU since 99. So we've been in and out of the Park Cities for whatever, but I started yoga at 15 as well.
So I have a wild memory, and we'll have to talk about this off of the camera,
Mhm.
but of doing yoga with you as a child, and I'm wondering if it's the same guy that I went to when I was
Was it Kurt
young.
Johnson?
Did he have the parachutes? I can't remember his name. My mom can't either. But the parachutes in his like house, and they were actually hot air balloons.
I don't know.
That's
There was
all I really
American Power
remember.
Yoga. That was in the
No,
Dallas area, American Power Yoga, and it was
it wasn't
super
a
everywhere.
no, it wasn't a studio. It was just it was just a guy that taught in Highland Park at his house. It's wild that I remembered that, but it had popped in, and I
I
asked my
might have
mom.
been there, dude.
I know, I know. It would not surprise me at all.
It wouldn't surprise me either.
Which then would explain why when we first met, we were like, why are you so
You're
familiar?
familiar.
Yeah. But totally, totally different story. Sorry, guys. But, it, with her and her books, I was so big, and I'm a Libra sun. So when
Mhm.
learning actually, about the rising and about your moon, I was like, no, I'm not going to be a Cancer rising. I'm
Yeah.
only reading my sun.
Oh, girl, don't I understand you? So house systems, the way we delineate houses is up for some debate. There are numerous different sorts of systems. There's whole sign house, Placidus, Porphyry. There's equal houses. There's quadrant houses. There's just people like to draw the map in a lot of different ways. Let me put it this way. And I was between two when I was younger. I was between Placidus and whole sign being the oldest, Placidus being the most common today. And the Placidus chart it made me have a stellium in the fifth. And a stellium in the fifth looked super fun because that's a fun house. And then the one in whole sign had me a stellium in the sixth. And I was like, oh no, not a stellium in the sixth. That's terrible. And the more my life came out, the more I was like, yeah, it's fucking whole sign. Like it actually is that way. I do not have a stellium in the fifth. I have a stellium in the sixth. This one is the one. This is how I know.
This is
Same as you.
this is it, and I'm sticking to it. So, if they're asking for
Well,
a reading,
it came out true.
can you explain to the people that don't understand what the rising, the moon, the sun sign is, and how they can figure it out?
Sure. So I think it's nice to sometimes lay out the circle. And people, I'm sure, all have their circles that they've generated on some online platform, Cafe Astrology or astro.com or something like this. So you have your own circle. When you're looking at the ascendant or the rising or the the Eastern horizon, not Western, the Eastern horizon, where things are rising over when you were born, where the sun rises over. That is the ascendant. And so it is truly what constellation is on the horizon
Mm-hmm.
that things are coming over. And then your descendant, or where your seventh house is, that is the Western horizon that things are setting over. Everything above that in the chart is visible. So we talk about the midheaven. That's the highest point in the sky. And then everything else is below the feet or below the horizon when you were born.
Mm-hmm.
So not visible. Now, this is important because the things that are visible will be the most visible in life. And the chart changes based upon the luminaries which are in the sky at birth. So if the sun is over the horizon, if it's in the sky and it's visible, you have a day chart. If the sun is below the horizon and it's not visible, you have a night chart. Now, sun sign astrology, the sun, a lot of people are born during the day because that's when doctors like to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But during the day, you have sun as the dominant luminary. If you're born at night, the moon is your dominant luminary. If you're born in the daytime, it's the sun is the leader of the day sect. And then you have Jupiter and Saturn, the two planets that are socially responsible, aka we work during the day. We're responsible to other people and we do our greater good. We do our higher learning. We live our purpose during the day. And at night, the moon, the internal body, the emotional body, the private life is the dominant luminary. And then the primary planets are Venus and Mars, what we love and enjoy and how we feel pleasure and how we act, move, and do. And we're much more liberated to do what we want, Venus and Mars, in the evening, traditionally, than we are during the day. So if you are born during the day, know that that sun sign astrology is going to work for you. If you're born in the evening and you've always, known your sun sign and maybe you don't affiliate with it or you don't really relate to it, check out your moon. And I bet you're going to get your mind blown about how much more you relate.
You are the best. You make it easy for people to understand. I love
I truly appreciate that.
I really really I love listening to you daily with your show. It comes
Thank you.
you know it's funny because it came up on my FYP on I want to say TikTok.
I
Like
hope so. I just got on TikTok and I've been enjoying the hell out of it. I love it.
I know I think it's fun too. And I was like, "Oh my God, I've got to reach out to her because I hadn't talked to you in a few months and I'm like, I've got to figure out what's going on with her." And then I'm like, "Oh my, she's got to do this show." She's got to be.
And I'm so excited to be here with you. TikTok, I just got on TikTok in like August because I decided to start the roadshow then. I had been doing a podcast prior to that
Mhm.
called the Text Astrology Podcast, and I'd been releasing a full and new moon podcast for about a year and a half before that. But I realized that it just made a lot more sense for me at this point in my life based upon some different things. But one of them being like, I'm not trying to produce a fully professional bi-monthly. It was scripted. I literally had written,
Oh,
I
like
wrote
it
every,
was like a full sit down video,
oh
the
yeah.
whole
Oh yeah.
shebang. Yeah, I know.
No,
It's a lot.
it was word for word written out, and I was doing some deep astrology, and it was really helpful for me to deepen my own practice. I mean, I take private clients, like you were saying, a lot
Yeah.
of people take private clients, but I found that the videos I would release on Instagram when I would do such a thing, they were more viewed than my podcast.
Oh, yeah, because it's easier.
Right. And I thought, you know what? If this is the media, if this is where people are, like TikTok, to be honest, is where people are.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Instagram. They're gone. It's me and millennials and Gen X, and we're like, oh, Instagram. Like everybody else is on TikTok.
I
So
know.
get there, go to TikTok, and I get there. And to be quite frank with you, Lauren, and I hope this changes, but for me, I wanted to want to view TikTok more than I do. I keep track of a few people like you and my friends Mel and Rimsha, who have a great podcast as well that I follow. But like, I keep track of a few people. And other than that, they have not managed to show me content that I want to see.
Yeah.
I love putting videos on there and I love interacting with the people who are there. And it's truly, I think, a really broad platform and I really enjoy it. But I can't manage to get content I want other than following people I know like you. And I want to listen to your stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm the same way. You know, the endless scrolling is gone. I think when it first
No.
started in 2020, I was like, oh, this is a great place to like go and see everything, because we're in our houses and let me learn how to
Right.
cook or something, you know what I mean? But now
Yeah.
these days it is just the people that I follow. I started a little TikTok for the podcast and it's been fun. I think it actually has driven some people as far as
Yes.
numbers, which surprisingly,
Yes.
but we were before all the social media world. So I just kind of try to stay
Oh,
with the times, but I'm never 100% like into the editing or like all of that stuff. Like make it basic.
right. Because to me, if there is something that you are supposed to, each person has their enlightened qualities. Whatever yours are, you're not going to have to force them or edit them
Oh,
or filter them. Your genius is going to be your genius, and you just need to share it.
exactly. Exactly. I love you so bad. All right,
Oh,
now
I thought we were good.
biggest misconception of astrology.
Oh, biggest misconception is I think that astrology is a predictive art.
Hmm.
There is astrology that people use to try to understand the future, but a lot of like that's called horary astrology.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people practice natal chart astrology, which is the study of your own birth chart to see what the natal promise, what the planets say about what your life and purpose and your ways of being are like and how your energy focuses itself, which can be helpful in self acceptance. And like,
Yes.
in my opinion, self acceptance also leads to self knowledge, and that is self love. And so when we can accept all parts of ourselves and understand them, then we can actualize and we can synthesize our whole being and focus ourselves. And it's hard to do in this Western society to just like love
It
yourself completely.
is. It
And I think astrology
is.
helps with that. There's also mundane astrology, which speaks to the cosmic weather, if you will, and like what to expect, like rain or snow or heat. It's kind of just
Mm-hmm.
like the vibe of what's going on and how the planets are at this time. And then there's also electional astrology, which is the study of picking dates to do things. Like if you wanted to create something that was completely stable and would never change, don't initiate it on an eclipse.
Exactly, right? Don't do what I did with the podcast.
But predictive, like that's just such a little tiny fraction of astrology. And like I said earlier, it's mostly for context, understanding, acceptance, and maximization.
I think it's such a personal thing too. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you're looking at your chart and when you get with somebody like you that can teach it, you do start looking at it in a different way and start using it in a different way. It's not always just to predict the future, but like you said, to really go inward for the self-love and self-care and
Mm-hmm.
see why you're having the transitions because astrology is one thing that a lot of people cannot argue with. I can flip over a
That's what Gen
tarot.
Z says.
I can flip over a tarot card and you can always go back and forth with me on arguing on how I read it. But when it comes to astrology, there's only so many ways that you can actually read the way that it is in your birth chart, you
And
know?
thank you for saying that because there are so many like TikTok and Instagram astrologers who, if you're an astrologer and you're listening to them, you're like, you don't know anything. Like you're saying nonsense. You're saying things that aren't even real or true. And I'll put it this way. Most astrologers are going to have their own methods, whether it be Placidus, whole sign, whether it be they're a Vedic
Yes.
astrologer, they're a Hellenistic astrologer, but they're going to have those, if that makes sense. You're
Yes.
someone who's schooled, who's versed. Most of us have mentors, have teachers because it's such a deep science. Like you wouldn't want a medical doctor speaking to you if they'd never formally gone to medical school or if they'd never actually checked to make sure that they were good,
No
at what they
doubt.
do. And
No
that's
doubt.
part of it. Like it's really important, I think, to have those fundamentals undergirded by some sort of at least mentorship or apprenticeship to different masters that are acknowledged as being such.
And I feel that way in all healing modalities. I feel um, one of my biggest lessons stepping into not only being a business owner in the spiritual world, because let's be honest, when
Mm-hmm.
you're owning yoga studios and crystal stores, that's the spiritual world. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
But but asking the questions, making sure that the teachers and the people that you want to be around you are living the same kind of life that they're preaching, um, that they're understanding what they're doing and it's not just for the bottom dollar. You know, it's funny.
Mm-hmm.
My family was always taught when you give advice, it is an energy exchange, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't always have to be a money thing. And I think these days, everything, because money is our exchange and it is used as an energy exchange, is put on everything sometimes to that ridiculous level. And it's really
Oh,
easy for people and to go onto the internet and feel like they've learned what they need to learn and then share it inappropriately. And so I'm glad that we're kind of touching on that because when we talk about this kind of stuff, I want people to know, delve in. It's not a problem to ask people who are actually helping you with the healing where they stand.
hmm.
Like where they learned, how they live. I think that's something that any kind of
Yeah.
modality like that is something that needs to be discussed.
And
So,
if your listeners are interested, I mean, my teachers I studied with Austin Coppock, and he has a Fundamentals of Astrology course that's incredible. Chris Brennan is another of his collaborators, and also the founder and the producer of the Astrology podcast, which has been running for I think almost a decade now, and it's one of the best places to get really clear and cogent advice on in terms of astrology, and many different voices as well. I mean, they have a lot of guests, but all of which have backgrounds and have bodies of work which are incredible, and you can get a lot from listening to even just the free resources that are available. And I mean, I could go on. Chani Nicholas is another incredible person who's risen to popularity, and she has a lot of great resources. They all don't function under the same, like Chris and Austin are Hellenistic. And then Chani is a more modern astrologer who uses Placidus, for example. Or I think she might use Holstein now. She might have used Placidus back in the day. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, these people are all like people who have obviously devoted their lives. And I think that's the important part is like, has somebody put in the time to become a master of their art? Like we see so many people,
are
for
they
example,
walking their talk?
but they'll just go get a certification, or they'll go get
Yes.
a credential immediately after finding an art.
Hmm.
And I think that true depth within a space is also the practice, which is the
Yes.
devotion, which is the time. And even like Malcolm Gladwell, what was his thing? 10,000 hours, like
Yeah.
for people to do really master something.
To really
And that's
master
what
it.
it is. Yeah, it's just time and devotion, and it's interest. That's what provides depth and accuracy.
Exactly. And I think that it's very, very, very important for people to understand that when they're going out and looking for these modalities. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do it, guys, do it. All right, now let's end with what was your biggest surprise as you've delved into this professional career and kind of changed from the time that we've met doing events and charity to
Mm-hmm.
having our studios to now stepping
Mm-hmm.
into the podcast roadshow astrology world full
Mm-hmm.
time. What's been your biggest surprise?
So this is so appropriate, Lauren. You are the best with creating things. We are
Thank you.
speaking so close to a partial lunar eclipse. People don't even know. We're speaking like an hour before a partial lunar eclipse in Taurus at 5 degrees of Taurus. But my biggest surprise has been how much the lunar nodes are imperative for astrological accuracy. Like they're the most important things that uh, I didn't realize it at first. I really didn't give a fuck about them at first.
Mm-hmm.
But then I would see these charts, and I'd be privileged to read marriage charts or death charts or, birth charts, like just these very, like when your friends are giving birth, or when someone has someone pass, and you get to see these really impactful charts for the people the closest to you. And they always included incredible nodal activity, like insanely intense nodal activity with every major life change chart. And
Mm.
that was something I've been realizing of late, that every major human change chart that I've noticed, there is incredible nodal activity, and the nodes give the eclipses, and we're speaking on an eclipse.
I
And I
mean,
would have never guessed that, like, throughout. I've been surprised. Like, I married somebody who betrayed the hell out of me, and I'm more surprised about lunar nodes and the effects in charts. And for the listeners as well, the lunar nodes, it's the place where the sun's apparent path through the sky. So obviously we're going around the sun. The sun doesn't move, but its path is through the ecliptic. And so its apparent path and the moon's orbit, the moon's actual orbit, they cross at certain points that move because of precession of equinoxes and because of our axial tilt and all kinds of things. But where the nodes are is where all the light is going. The light is the information. So the sun and the moon's light is all headed towards that point. One point of which is what we're moving towards in a linear fashion, and one point is what we're moving away from. So
wow.
it's like the threads of the whole story that we're weaving together here on this planet. And the more I've encountered them, the more I've been like, this is every astrologer who's not using nodes needs to use nodes, node being Greek for knot. So where the fates knot onto the physical space and how they connect. But I think that everybody in their own charts too, who's listening to this, who might have some facility or who maybe is going to get a reading,
Mm-hmm.
if your astrologer doesn't use nodes, no, it's not going to work.
Walk away. Just go. Just
Well,
go.
and then yourself use nodes. Just use nodes. That's
Use the
all.
nodes, people. Use your lunar nodes.
Yes.
Well, with that, Rachel, I am so happy that you're here. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and shout out your socials, where people can find you, where they can see your show.
I am at Rachel Ruth Tate on TikTok, on Instagram. RachelRuthTate.com is me. RachelRuthTate.as.me to schedule. You can schedule on my website as well, but that's my acuity scheduling for the Gen Z who loves that. And anything else, I mean, you will probably find me on Instagram or on TikTok every day at the Astrology Roadshow.
It's
And that
amazing.
is
You
just
don't want to miss that one. I will tell you, I have pretty much listened to every single day for the last, I want to say what month, for the month of October. And I think almost every single one, I am having whatever you're saying has happened in some form or fashion. You have nailed it. So
I am so blessed to connect with you today, Lauren, and I'm excited for anybody who gets into astrology by way of this episode or connects with you later about astrology. I know that you have your own sort of understanding of your chart and everything that you've been through. And so I encourage people to connect with us both on these topics and anything else.
yes, well, thank you. Thank you again, Rachel. And thank you everybody for listening to Get Enlightened with me, Lauren Scott. Bye, Rachel. Thanks again, hun.
Bye, Lauren. Thank you.
All right, let me